Welcome back to Active Self-Protection Extra. Today on John's Briefs, we have Mark Victor again from Attorneys for Freedom. I want to talk about the issue in the laundromat, that we had a big fight that broke out, and then all of a sudden a gun gets drawn. And I was a little like, oh boy, this gets a little scary, so I want to talk to the attorney and get his thoughts on it. Today's video is brought to us by Firearms Legal Protection. Firearms Legal Protection is a legal defense program for lawful gun owners with a 24/7 emergency hotline and plans designed specifically for self-defenders. They are offering a discount on their plan to Ask fans, so hit the link in the description for that. All right, Mark, so you've watched it. You've seen what happened here. Obviously, at the end, I was kind of surprised no charges were filed at all here.
Yeah. You know, this exact circumstance, I think, is sort of a hole in some of our self-defense, deadly physical force statutes across the country. And we used to have this hole here in Arizona. When I first started practicing, we didn't have the defensive display of a firearm statute. And so the precise situation is somebody is threatening to use unlawful ordinary physical force, right? I'm threatening to punch you in the face. I say, hey man, I can't believe you said something bad about my favorite sports team or my religion or my
color of my tie.
Whatever. And I'm upset and I'm going to punch you in the face.
So there's the distinction. If you haven't watched the channel a bunch, again, ordinary physical force likely to cause injury. Deadly physical force likely to cause great physical injury.
Death or really serious physical injury. Right. So whatever those mean, right? Because there are some, we've had many cases that, is this a serious injury? Is this an ordinary? So let's just make it simple. I'm going to slap you across the face. Right. And you have a gun on you. What you really want to do is you don't want to fight me.
No.
And you don't want to stand there and be slapped across the face either. What you really want to do is say, look, Mark, I got a firearm. Leave me the hell alone. But if you take that firearm out, and this is what was happening in Arizona prior to this statute, if you mention the firearm, if you put your hand on the firearm, if you take it out, even if you're pointing it up or down, the prosecutors have said, hey, you are meeting ordinary physical force, a threat of ordinary with deadly physical force. Yeah. And now you're using too much force and you're getting prosecuted. So we had a real problem here. So Arizona has enacted this defensive display of a firearm, which in essence says for the situation of ordinary physical force. That's what we're talking about now. They also have some extra language that says, yeah, you can do this for deadly physical force, but we don't need that because we already had that regular section. I wish they hadn't done that, but they did that. So, but for regular, ordinary physical force, there are some things that you can do with your firearm. You can tell somebody, hey, just letting you know, I got a gun, leave me alone. You wouldn't think we'd have to put that in the statute, but that could be threatening. That could be interpreted as threatening deadly physical force. Another thing that you can do is you can put your hand on a contained firearm. Just simply putting your hand on it.
On the holster.
Or the people who kind of pulled up the shirt and said, hey, take a look at this. Do you really want to slap me in the face kind of thing? Those guys were getting charged with disorderly conduct or some such thing. And so you can do that under the defensive display. Then there's the one that I think is the hardest one to understand.
Hasn't been adjudicated yet.
We don't know what it means, right? You can display your firearm in a protective manner, whatever a protective manner is. And by the way, I'm happy to argue that this is a protective manner because that's the way guns work, right? I mean, they don't really, it's more like a rock. If you don't have it aimed at somebody, you can hit them with it. But I think there's an argument that's a protective manner. I don't think that that's what the legislature was thinking about. I think, and if somebody was going to do this, I would strongly encourage them, if they were going to pull out their firearm, I tell people either point it up or point it down.
Yeah, low ready position.
Low ready and back up and make it clear, hey man, I don't want any trouble. So when I look at what she did in this video, she took it out and she held it down on the low ready. I don't think there's any question that there's at least a threat of ordinary physical force.
Clearly
they just had the fist fight, right? They just had the big wrestling match in the laundromat. This lady leaves. So now it's over. She's retreated. She's at her car. And then the other woman, the one who claims to have been a law student or something, then becomes the aggressor clearly and walks out. And at least I would think, we don't know what she said, right? Because here again, we don't know the facts.
We don't have all the facts.
What if her lawyer says, she just walked out to say, I'm so sorry.
Right.
I wish I hadn't done that. We should be friends, whatever. So we don't know. But if you put those facts in, now we don't really have a threat of ordinary physical force. But for the sake of discussion, let's just say this lady comes out and she's still ready to go.
Yeah, she still wants to yip or whatever.
So the other lady, who's smaller, maybe smaller, doesn't, or shorter anyways, doesn't want to get into a fist fight, so she pulls out her firearm and she holds it at the low ready. In compliance, in my view, with Arizona's defensive display of a firearm statute. I tell people, don't do that.
Okay.
She should, because you're creating a real risk, right? This thing was videotaped. What if it wasn't videotaped? I can tell you, if it wasn't videotaped, the woman who walked out there is going to say, she pulled out a firearm and pointed it in my face and said she's going to blow my head off. And the prosecutor is going to say, well, that's not defensive display of a firearm.
Right.
And I know this because this is what we do. This happens all the time. People come in, they tell me the story of what happened. I call the prosecutor. I sit down with the prosecutor and say, look, man, here are the facts. Prosecutor says, well, those are nice facts, Mark, but those aren't the facts I'm working with. And trials really are about finding facts.
Right.
That's why we call the jury the fact finder.
The finder of fact. Yeah.
And if you're in trial, what that mostly means is we're disagreeing about the facts. Because if we all agreed on the facts, well, now it's a hypothetical, and we lawyers can pretty much figure out the answer. There are some cases where we're just not going to agree whether this was justified or not, but for the most part, we're going to come to a consensus and be pretty close. So it's almost always the facts, and I think that's what people miss in these cases, because they give me these hypotheticals with given facts. And the world doesn't work like that, unless it's on video. And even in that case, like I said, we don't know what she said. We still have some facts. But under what we saw, assuming this was a real, ordinary threat of physical force, I think she should be left alone. I think she acted reasonably. My take on it is she wasn't looking for trouble. Right?
Well, and they didn't charge her with anything, and the police didn't give her a hard time, so they agree with you.
Even if they don't have a defensive display of a firearm statute, and even if the argument could be made she threatened deadly physical force in response to ordinary, it shouldn't be made.
So I haven't primed Mark on this one as well. We just have such good discussions. I'd rather have him on camera than behind the scenes.
Have you ever primed me on anything?
No, but I just, well, people think, you put this stuff in the can and you already know what he's going to say. I don't know what you're going to say. So it seems to me that as somebody who, this is obviously a big part of what I do, is study the laws and try to talk with you and other experts about it, is that Arizona statute, which I thought it was a good change, that it kind of, as a baseline, establishes the display of a firearm as ordinary physical force and not deadly physical force. Is that about right?
I think you hit the nail on the head right there.
So
and what we're saying, we're sort of prejudging. We're saying under circumstances where you're facing an imminent threat of ordinary physical force, the legislature is now saying, we find it reasonable to just simply tell someone you got a gun, put your hand on a contained firearm, or hold it in a protective manner. We're telling you that we think that's reasonable.
Well, and I think that throughout our nation, generally speaking, now I know we're opening a big can of worms here, and I don't want to open the whole can, but generally law enforcement, when they display a firearm on a far more regular basis than a private citizen does, and we don't consider that the use of deadly force, and we consider it a use of ordinary force, right?
Well, I would call it could still be considered a threat, right? This is why we have to look at everything carefully.
Obviously, circumstances and all that, but it wasn't the use of deadly force, even if it was a threat of deadly force.
But you got to remember, in most places where statutes talk about using deadly force, they combine the threat of deadly force or the use of deadly force. So most of the time, and there are some exceptions, but most of the time, at least in the Arizona statutes, anytime you can use, you can threaten. If you can threaten, you can use, and they kind of are packaged together, with the exception of the defensive display and a few others, actually.
And that's a fairly recent law here. So as always, check your local statutes. People watching from all over the country and really even all over the world. So check your local statutes because it may be different in your state. But I think that this is an interesting one for people to look at. And I do also think that sometimes people look at what happened to somebody in one state and they go, oh, that's what I'm going to do in my state. But your statutes may be different, and so you want to watch that.
Yeah, in this case here, I agree. This is a good, as they say in football, it's a good no call.
Right.
This is a good no charge. But this is going to be charged at some percentage. Some number out of 10 prosecutors are going to charge that case. I don't know what the number is. I'm going to guess maybe the number is probably 3 or 4, something like that.
So check your statutes. Mark, really appreciate the discussion.
Thanks for having me.